Hi everyone, welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Today is February 27th, 2018. The U.S. Embassy in Japan is a stated feature of U.S. politics and diplomacy. There's been a mission here from the United States since 1906, always headed by an ambassador that is appointed by the President of the United States. The current ambassador is William Haggerty, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the administration, how the embassy is run, and how the ambassador is facilitated. Today I'm joined by my guest, Torkel Patterson. Torkel, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm honored that you're here. You're a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. You have been here for a long time. You've done a lot of different things. And one of the most interesting things that you did was you were assigned to an ambassador to help him do his thing. And there's a special breed of animal that does that for each of the ambassadors that come into town.
Yes, that's right. I used to work in the Bush administration, both 41, first President Bush and second President Bush, 43. And in 43's time, Ambassador Howard Baker and his wife, Nancy Kassenbaum Baker, were asked to be ambassadors by President Bush. And I got to know him because I was the NSC counterpart, I got to know Howard Baker personally. When he'd come to Washington, I'd escort him through the White House. Not that he needed any help in knowing where he was going,
right,
but he didn't have the pass, so I would take him around. And through that period, I got to know him. And when his special assistant, a guy named John Tuck, who had been a long time with Howard Baker, decided to leave the post as special senior advisor to the ambassador, Howard Baker asked me if I would leave Washington and go help Howard.
This position of special advisor, it's so intriguing to me. And I've known of certain people that have filled that role in the past. I didn't know much about it. And that's why I'd like to talk about it a little bit on Tokyo on Fire, because it's a position that adds tremendous value and insight to the ambassador as he's going about his daily business of running the embassy.
Sure. Well, the political appointee ambassadors, there's two types. There's a political appointee ambassador and also a career ambassador. Mike Armacost is an example of the latter. But the more famous ones, the ones that everyone knows, Howard Baker or Mike Mansfield or former Vice President Mondale, they're all political appointees, and they are allowed to bring with them their own helpers. Mm-hmm. So they have they're usually their scheduler, the one that knows their Rolodex, the one that knows if somebody's calling that he is a good friend, put him through, and maybe their secretary. But they also get a special assistant, which has been in recent years given the title of senior advisor. So that person is usually someone that adds an expertise that they feel may be missing in the embassy, mm-hmm, or maybe missing in their own abilities. And examples would be Kent Calder, who is a scholar, and he could write very well, and he could do research very well. And others were speechwriters, mm-hmm, people that wrote speeches for the ambassador. And when Howard Baker asked me, the first thing I said to him was, I don't really write speeches. And he said, Torkel, I know how to give a speech. I'm not looking for you to write my speeches.
Okay, so it really depends on the particular individual who is going to become ambassador.
Right, and what is the type of person that they want. And so what Howard Baker wanted in my case was someone he could bounce ideas off of that could hear what was being said in a meeting, and then later he would say, well, what did they really mean by that? And get a view that wasn't one that would necessarily be the view from the State Department.
So you're really in the inner circle, and you're providing a level of insight and intelligence. So you were a kind of a Japan hand before he even asked you to do that, and that was probably part of the gig, right?
In my case, that would have been the case. So I also could speak a little Japanese, so the Japanese would find me accessible, mm-hmm, and I might get invited to dinner with some of them, politicians or bureaucrats, or they'd take me out, or they'd join, and then so they'd want the rest of the story, or they'd want to try to propose an idea and see if I would float it, back in with the ambassador or whatever.
The ambassadors in recent history over the last maybe 30 years have all been political appointees, and Tokyo is a prime slot for an ambassador, a contributor, a donor for a political campaign, and this is kind of one of the rewards that's given to somebody that's really helped a candidate become president.
That's correct. In the case of, the Japanese would like to see someone who is very well known, someone like a Mike Mansfield, who is the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate, or Mondale as Vice President, Howard Baker, who'd been White House Chief of Staff, and his wife Nancy Kassenbaum had been a senator. Howard Baker, of course, was Watergate, what did you know and when did you know it?
Right.
So very well known. So that type of person they love to have. But they've also been very appreciative of having people like, of course, Mrs. Kennedy, who, because of her name, connection to President Obama. And I guess the bottom line is they like to have someone that they think can pick up the phone and talk to the president if necessary. But in reality, normally they wouldn't do that. They talk to the Secretary of State or the Assistant Secretary that's for East Asia, and ambassadors would work through them. But Howard Baker, for example, would send emails to the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State Personal Affairs and make suggestions or recommendations about certain things. So it depends on the ambassador and their level of engagement and who they feel comfortable in engaging with.
And it seems to telegraph a bit of the sense of who the ambassador is and what he's trying to do during his position here as ambassador.
That's right. It telegraphs a lot. Sometimes the person he picks may telegraph something, but normally that person has not much visibility,
right,
and doesn't show up in pictures. Tries to avoid being in. White House rule of thumb: don't get in the picture with the president.
Sure.
State Department rule of thumb: don't get in the picture with the ambassador.
Right.
So.
What an intriguing position, though. I mean,
yeah, but so
the things that you get into.
Very interesting because you're sitting in most meetings and you get to listen, depending on the ambassador. In Howard Baker's case, he wanted me in every meeting, but other people's case, they may or may not ask them to sit in a meeting.
So is it accurate to say that of all of the people that have held this position, there's like an alumni? I mean, the people who have done that. You're in communication. You run into them from time to time at cocktail parties.
The more recent ones I do know. Suzanne Pasala worked with Ambassador Roos. The current one, Joe Schmelzheis, I know. The previous one,
Ed
Ken
Lincoln.
Calder.
Ken
Ed
Calder,
Lincoln,
right.
Of course, is very well known. Ken Calder and I stayed in touch for quite a while during his time and afterwards.
Well, especially after having done this position, so perhaps the position is a 2-year term or a 3-year term, depending on how long the ambassador likes you around.
Right.
But from there, it's not quite a springboard. It's more like a what a tremendous investment.
I guess it would be a validation in someone's career. Okay, here is one of the leading, well-known figures in diplomacy or in the political world who had you helping them and advising them. It gives you a little credibility that you know what you're talking about.
Right.
And so in retrospect for that, for me, I happened to be someone that Armitage wanted to use in another role, so I left to go back to the State Department as a Deputy Assistant Secretary. But Suzanne Pasala left and was executive director for the U.S.-Japan Council under Irene Hirano. Because while Suzanne was working for Ambassador Roos, was 311, and during 311 she helped create the Tomodachi Initiative.
She's still very engaged,
and
isn't
so she's very engaged with
right.
that. So that sort of carried on and carried through.
And you're still very engaged. I mean, you're
right.
doing a lot of high-speed rail, maglev. You're sitting on the board of the
to your
Central
point,
Japan.
I guess I would say, the reason that I'm involved with JR Central today is because when I was the senior advisor to Howard Baker, I met Chairman Kasai, at that time President Kasai of Central Japan Railway. And through that was when our relationship began. And the maglev, which is now called the Chuo Shinkansen, the linear that's being constructed, which is the world's largest privately financed construction project in the history of the world.
It's huge.
It's going on right now. Well, the idea is, at his time, he wanted to share that technology with the United States. And I actually wrote it first in 2002 when I worked for Howard Baker. So that 2002, it's now 2018. So 16 years ago, I wrote the maglev, and now we're still working, and we're trying to move it to the U.S. So in a very real sense, what you said about it, the springboard, I hadn't thought about that, but actually that may be the case. That was an entryway into something greater.
Right.
And I have to say that of all the people I have ever worked for, and I've worked for some very interesting people, the most special to me were Howard Baker and Nancy Kassenbaum. And they were just wonderful, wonderful people. They loved Japan. They loved their experiences here, and for me, it was the greatest job I ever had because I didn't have to write anybody's fitness report. I didn't have to write anybody's evaluation. I only worked for Howard Baker. I had nobody below me.
And you're not really in the State Department. You're not part of the commercial team.
You're your own independent self. And you're in the State Department. You're a political appointee assigned to the Department of State.
Okay.
So you follow their rules and regulations. But I have nobody working for me. For someone that was given that seniority of a rank, usually you might have someone working for you, but you know, for me, people management is always the most interesting and most challenging. And to have 2 years, 3 years where you don't have to manage people,
right?
That's a holiday.
Yes. Well, also you were a military officer, you were a naval
Yes.
officer originally.
Yes.
So you had clearance. I can't imagine what kind of clearance. I mean, this must be a major headache to pull somebody kind of out of the environment.
Normally, yes. If you are, I had been working at the NSC, so I had all my clearances, so it was an easy step to transfer them. But normally, if someone coming in new would have to get a new security clearance, it may take a long time. So it takes 6 months to a year, depending. We see the current challenges the White House has now on security clearances. So it can take up to some period of time.
The embassy just announced maybe 2 weeks ago that Joe Smelzeyes, a friend that we both know, was appointed in the capacity of the special advisor. So, and congratulations, Joe. That's what a great thing to happen.
So, yes, very good. And Joe is someone that's known the ambassador for some time. I think he's the godfather of his eldest son. Okay. So when the ambassador was working here, I think he met Joe, and they'd known each other for some time. So here's someone where he has a true confidant. Yes. Someone who knows Japan. He's been in the environment. He can give him the rest of the story on things, and knows a lot of people in the business community. So he's a brilliant choice.
So you knew him beforehand?
I actually didn't know him. No? I knew him before he became in that position, but I didn't know of him until I heard that he may be the man. Okay. Yes. Yes,
because he's been here, working at Sega for maybe 15 years. He's, a graduate of the ASIJ, the American School in Japan. So he's a very well-known and well-respected commodity here. So what a great thing to see. So who knows what's going to happen with him? I mean, he's going to obviously have a great time under the current ambassador and do a great job there. And then who knows what's going to happen?
Well, who knows? But I think there's enough to think about just in the present. The ambassador has a lot of, he's off to a great start, and he's going to have an interesting time leading up through the LDP election and then the Olympics and keeping everything moving forward. So it's a great opportunity.
I want to wrap this piece up, but recently in the press there was a survey about the worst presidents in the United States, right? The United States history, and a lot of that is just fluff and whatever storyline.
President Buchanan.
Right. Well, that's what many say. But I wonder if the same thing could be said of the ambassadors who have been stationed in Tokyo. There's obviously some ups and downs, and how they're calibrated and how they're judged. It would be interesting to see what that list would look like.
Well, I think it depends on the person's the reference point of the one that's doing the survey. Right. Some people are Paul Mill oriented, some people are politics, some people are economics. So I think each one has a unique perspective from which to operate from. And so we've seen some very interesting people, but none of them, I would say, they're highly screened, highly competitive positions that lots of people are seeking for, would love to have. The political appointees are up in the stratosphere, but I don't, the Japanese probably have an opinion, but from my experience, each one is, when Caroline Kennedy came, she was a little weak on the security issues, but by the time she left, she was really good at communicating the government's position, and the Japanese government really respected her position and listened to her. So people learned in that role. And I think Ambassador Haggerty has come on strong on trade, but as he works through this, he'll find that it's usually a Marine in Okinawa that defines his term. So we'll see what happens.
And a lot depends on who the Deputy Chief of Mission is, too.
The Deputy Chief of Missions have a big influence on how the embassy runs. And so this embassies all get graded on how well they run, and that score a lot of time gets credited to the ambassador, but it's really the Deputy Chief of Mission that the ambassador sets a tone, but the Deputy Chief of Mission is responsible for that. So if you went back and did check the archives and found out what the scores were for each of the embassies, you'd say, oh, this guy got a terrible score. Well, he didn't really get that score. The DCM got that score. So the ambassador sets a tone. So they're kind of two separate worlds, I would say, how the embassies run from the State Department's point of view and how the diplomacy is conducted at the ambassador's level. And they each choose something that's their own passion to engage in. Ambassador Roos focused on how do we get high tech going in Japan? How do we seed entrepreneurialism? That was his thing. Howard Baker liked the high politics. and the Paul Mill sort of things.
Right.
And so I think Ambassador Haggerty is strong on the trade things now, but I think he'll still move forward and decide what it is that's important.
Hasn't been a year yet.
Has not been a year yet.
Right.
No.
The DCM, just to kind of clarify this, the Deputy Chief of Mission, these are career State Department guys.
Yes,
usually.
always State Department guys in Tokyo. They're always considered to be people that for sure will become an ambassador. They're
so that was my question. Is there
the DCMs are usually all-stars for the important political posts.
Okay.
So UK, Japan, and then to a lesser extent France and Germany. But the UK is so much Four Eyes Alliance.
But where will they be ambassador to if the political
appointees
are
Mike
in the
Mahalik was,
choice spots?
I don't know if you remember Mike Mahalik.
I sure do, yeah.
He was the DCM for the second part of Howard Baker's term and into Ambassador Schiefer's term. Mm-hmm. He went to be ambassador to Vietnam. So ambassador to Vietnam, ambassador to the Philippines, ambassador to Korea. Normally Korea can go either way. It's been career, it's been non-career. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of good opportunities for David Scheer was in the embassy, did a really great job as the political minister. David Scheer was ambassador to Vietnam, and then he was Undersecretary of Defense, even though he's a State Department guy, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. So there's good examples of people that come out of here. Jim Zumwalt was the very strong contributor in the community. He and his wife, and Jim became ambassador to a country in Africa, Malawi, I think. So it just depends on the circumstance.
Right.
Now he's the head of the Sasagawa Peace Foundation. He's the president of Sasagawa Peace Foundation in Washington, D.C.
Who knows what's going to happen?
Who knows? Right.
Terrific talking to you.
Great.
Torkel Patterson.
Hey, great.
Running the embassy in Tokyo is a big deal. It requires a lot of moving parts and specialized individuals. Please stay tuned.